Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book in Houston. And before we get started and bring Paige out, I'm just going to make some general store announcement stuff, let everybody know what is going on with us at the store. So if you have not been to come visit us in a while, we are open. We're still encouraging masks. And we are not limiting the number of people in the store. So I hope that you will come visit us. We have recently reopened on Sundays, which we're super excited about. We just with staffing wise and everything throughout the pandemic, we had been closed on Sundays since March of 2020, but we're now open 12 to 5 on Sundays. So you can come visit us then. And then the rest of the week, we are open 10 to 6. We have just a handful of events left this year. McKenna is going to be on Thursday at 1 o'clock to chat with Anne Marie Ryan, Jenny Bayless, and Maggie Knox about their new Christmas romance releases. Riley Sager is going to be interviewing Jeffrey Deaver on Friday night. Thursday night, if you're cozy readers, I'm going to be chatting with Laura Bradford and Cynthia Kuhn about their new releases. And then next Thursday, we're really excited. Earlier this year, we partnered with the Crime Writers of Color and Queer Writers of Crime to put together an every other month reading series. So the next one is going to be next Thursday, which is the 16th at 7 o'clock. And it's going to be Alex Segura and Kelly Garrett talking about some of their favorite books of the year, looking back at some of the 2021 releases. They're going to be chatting with Kate Holohan, Robert Justice, Mia Mamansala, Sujata Massey, Katie Richards, and Marla Bradine. So a good list of stuff. So I hope that you will come check that out with us again. We've had lots of people asking when we're going to have in-store stuff again. And we're really excited that we are going to have some authors back in the store in January and February next year. So when you're looking at the January and February event calendars, make sure you pay attention. The events are either going to be listed as virtual or in-store. For the in-store events, we will be requiring masks when you're in the seating area. It's a small area over there. We want to make sure everybody feels comfortable, and we want to make sure we keep the authors and everybody that's coming to visit safe and healthy, so that way we can keep doing in-store stuff. Obviously, with this new Omicron variant out there, we're all paying close attention to the news, and we've been in touch with publicists and authors and make sure we can have authors in the store, but also make it as safe and comfortable for everybody as we can. Last weekend, 2 weekends ago, for Small Business Saturday, we were finally able to do a Murder by the Book Recommends in store, and it was really great to actually put out the chairs. It's been so long since I've had to put out chairs for events, and last time we did it, we were still wiping them down with Clorox wipes because it was like the week just before everything had closed down and nobody really knew, we weren't even wearing masks yet. So that's how long it's been since we'd had to put the chairs out. So it was really nice to be able to look up from the author table and see people sitting in those chairs and get to chat with people about books. And as we've mentioned, we're going to still keep doing virtual stuff. We've got a good mix of the two. But when we do start doing the in-store events, if there's an author that's coming through that you're curious about, or it's one of your favorite authors, if you can, it's super, super critical that you come visit us, that you buy books, that you have butts in seats, because publishers are going to be really looking closely at those events to make sure that it's still worthwhile to send authors out on the road. So once we can start doing stuff in store, please make sure you're supporting those in-store events as well as you've been doing with the virtual ones, so that way we can still get to do a mix of both. Tonight, I'm super excited to get to chat with Paige Shelton. She's got a new book in the Alaska Wild series, Dark Night, which just came out today. And so I'm super excited to get to chat with her about that. So we're going to bring her out and get started. And while we're chatting tonight, if you have questions for her, either about this series, the Scottish book series, any of her previous books, you can post those in the live chat in YouTube or the comments on Facebook, and we will get to them in just a little bit. How are you tonight, Paige?
I am wonderful. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, John.
Happy release day.
Thank you. It's always a fun, crazy, absolutely fabulous day. Love it. It never gets old.
Yeah. So do you have any release day rituals? Is there something that you have to do when it's a new book day?
Every year or every book, I tell myself, okay, first thing, I'm going to take it easy in the morning. I'm going to start with my morning Diet Coke. I'm not going to freak out and get on the computer right away. And I'm just going to take it slow and ease into it. And it never works. I'm on the computer first thing, checking everything right away. So I guess my tradition is fooling myself every book.
Yeah. Awesome. So as I mentioned, Dark Night is the third in the Alaska Wild series. It just came out today. If you guys are unfamiliar with Paige, here's her official bio. Paige Shelton had a nomadic childhood, as her father's job as a football coach took the family to 7 different towns before she was even 12 years old. After college at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa, she moved to Salt Lake City, where she thought she'd stay a few years, but she fell in love with the mountains and a great guy who became her husband. In 2015, her family moved to Arizona. In addition to the Alaska Wild series, she writes the Scottish Bookshop mystery series, beginning with The Cracked Spine. Her other series include The Farmer's Market, Cooking School, and Dangerous Type Mysteries. So for anybody who is watching and might not be familiar with the Alaska Wild series, can you tell them a little bit about it and what everybody's up to in the new book?
Sure, you bet. The premise is that the main character, named Beth Rivers, had been kidnapped by a man in St. Louis and held in his van for 3 days, tortured. And she escaped escaped the van, throwing herself out of the van as far as she remembers. She spends some days in the hospital, recovering from a surgery from a subdural hematoma, and just all in all recovering. But her kidnapper had not been caught. He's on the run. And she's afraid. She wants to get out of there. So she got out of there and secretly planned to go someplace far, far away. So she snuck into an office in the hospital one night and found Benedict, Alaska, and somehow booked a room in a halfway house and found herself up there, hiding away from her past and keeping her real name, Beth Rivers, instead of her thriller writer name, Elizabeth Fairchild. So she really thinks she's hiding well. Bless you. And the only other person who knows who she truly is the local police chief Grill.
Perfect. And so what is she up to in this new book, Dark Knight?
Well, again, solving a murder. It starts off with a sense of domestic violence, and she's compelled by this violence to put herself in the middle of it. She can't even quite understand why she's so compelled to and curious about what happened to a woman of the community and why she was beaten up and how her injuries are going to affect her. So she throws herself in the middle of an investigation that of a murder that occurs because of that domestic violence. But there's a little bit of a twist. Her mom, who was on the run down in the lower 48 because she shot at, or allegedly shot at, the man who kidnapped her, shows up and messes everything up.
So as we talked about before, you're known for writing cozy mysteries, and this one, at least the first in the series, as the series progresses, they get a little bit more thriller and maybe a little bit more dark. So they're definitely it's a good mix of the two as the series starts. I'm curious, what was the conversation like with your agent and editor when you decided you wanted to do something that was kind of different from the cozies that you were doing before?
Well, I'm so lucky in that I have an agent and an editor who are both receptive to pretty much everything. My agent was on top of it immediately, helping me, go the right direction. It wasn't the first thing I turned into her to consider. When I had the conversation about doing something more suspenseful or a little more toward a thriller, it wasn't the first thing I turned in. So she's very good. I tell everybody, when you're looking for an agent, make sure you get an agent who knows you better than you know yourself. And I feel really fortunate that that's what I ended up with. And so she was really able to guide me. And being receptive, she also knew that things need to have the right hook. And so with the addition of the Alaska and the injuries that Beth has gone through, it created a nice hook. And so once from there, it kind of snowballed into something new. And then the editor, I've actually had two different editors working on the series at Minotaur, both named Hannah, both fabulous. And so I have just been very fortunate with the whole series all the way around.
I just have this image of you kind of pulling a Taylor Swift like she did with Folklore. You're working on this thing and you're like, oh, by the way, I have this thing that's not anything like I was working on before. But so it sounds like everybody was kind of involved in the process and kind of knew what was going on as it was happening.
Yes, everybody was involved, and I think that's more common than not. I think every writer out there has a bunch of different stories they'd like to tell, and if they're lucky, they have a group around them that can help them make them the best they can be. So I really appreciate having my agent and editor's guidance to get where it needs to be. But I bet most writers have a lot of different things they'd like to try to write. Yeah.
And so when you were doing this, were you aware of, as I mentioned, you do a really good job balancing kind of, especially in the first one, you do a really good job of balancing, like if you're a cozy reader who doesn't read a lot of thrillers, you're not going to be completely thrown off. If you're a thriller reader who doesn't really read cozies, it's not going to be kind of too light. So were you worried about trying to strike that balance to maybe be able to take those cozy readers along with you as you do this new journey?
Well, I appreciate that. I was a little bit, and then I felt like that concern or that worry was causing me to not write the real story. So that is actually something I just had to let go of. I had to say, I've got to put the real story, the story that's in my head, the story that's in my heart, on the screen, and hopefully that will work itself out.
And for people who are watching who might know Paige's cozier stuff and haven't gotten into the series, like I said, there's nothing in it that you're not going to be reading and all of a sudden you're going to be like, oh my god, this is so gory, this is so graphic. If there is anything that's happened, I mean, it's not going to like come out of nowhere. You're like, oh my gosh, I didn't expect this to be like, it's not like Silence of the Lambs or anything like that where people are just like getting gutted on Paige. So don't think that because we're saying thrillers, it's just the suspense is definitely ramped up. And I think the stakes are a little bit higher just because of it being in the middle of nowhere and things like that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So speaking of it kind of being in the middle of nowhere, we're in Benedict, Alaska. Is it based on a real place? And what kind of research did you do to kind of be or to write in like one of these little towns that you just really have no easy way to get to?
It is based on a real place. It's based on Gustavus, Alaska, which is right outside Glacier Bay National Park up in Alaska. My husband and I were lucky enough to get up there, I think 2018. So before we even, before COVID was even a bad twinkle in anybody's eyes. So we were still able to travel. We were up there. We got to visit Juneau, and then we got to visit Gustavus, and it was as primitive as I portray Benedict to be. I don't think it probably isn't now because of the satellites and so much more happening. I'd like to get up there again someday to see, but we literally had no internet, no cell phone, and it was true up there, as I've put in the books, where people go to the airport. People go to the airport to use the internet connection, and that's a real thing. And you could be out in the middle of nowhere, walking up and down this cold beach and no reception at all, and see no people, and wild horses might roam by, or you might see bear. I remember when we went there, the first thing I said, okay, so what wildlife will we see out there? I asked the woman who ran the cabin that we stayed in, and she's like, all of it. So we got to see pretty much all of it, and it was pretty fabulous.
And it also seems like a really great way to get around having to deal with things like cell phones and technology and stuff like that. Like if you're in the middle of nowhere, then just cell phones just don't work, and that's just the way it is.
Exactly. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to have it because Beth can't just call for help, or Beth can't just call and report something that she's seen. She has to get somewhere, or she has to leave a message because nobody else has reception either. It's been a wonderful thing to work with. I kind of dread the day that the internet really is everywhere. We do have the satellites, and then I can't make the excuse any longer. But it's been wonderful. Yeah.
So what kind of research did you do into things like wilderness training? And there are multiple times where she's gone out in a snowstorm either by herself or with other people, and they're kind of telling her, no, you have to dress warmer, take this stuff. What kind of research did you do into that kind of like survival out there?
Well, I'm married into the most outdoorsy family you would ever know. I mean, I was never outdoorsy, not even a little bit. I mean, I like to go watch football games outside, but that's pretty much it for my outdoorsiness. So, my husband is a wealth of knowledge as far as outdoor gear or any sort of outdoor survival. So I feel very fortunate that I had that as well. But also his whole family. I mean, I remember we were somewhere and his cousin said, I just really need to go sleep on the ground somewhere outside. I'm thinking, okay, have a great time. I'll be in the hotel.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is never an urge that I would have.
No, not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. So I have that resource right there. And Charlie, my husband's family, his parents lived outside Anchorage for about 20 years. So and we did go up and visit them up there a long time ago. So their knowledge, my husband's knowledge, it was just a way to bring all those pieces together.
Nice. So this one's just come out. When in the process of the pandemic were you working on this book?
Let's think. So I turned it in. Well, this was right in the thick of things. Right at the beginning of right at the beginning of 2020. I was working on it. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it did cross my mind as far as, I don't know if that's what you're going to ask, but gosh, what do I want to put in here about that? And I just wasn't ready to do any of it.
Yeah. Well, and I thought what you did kind of in a smart way, and it's something that, works perfectly well with the series. You talk several times in the book, there's a character who is a census man who is not used to this area. And, multiple characters talk about how, everybody will go to the bar, or if you haven't seen anybody in a while, like they check in on people because of the way that like isolation can like just affect people in different ways. And so I thought that was a really interesting way of sort of mentioning it, but kind of not.
Right. At least talking about the isolation and that can come as a result of that. Interestingly, though, probably because of the pandemic, the next book that I don't mean to segue into that right away, but Winter's End is the fourth book that comes out next year. It begins with that death walk, that walk that they take at the end of winter every year, going to search for people to make sure everyone survived winter. So it kind of keeps that isolation sense going.
Yeah. And I'm glad to know that there's going to be a fourth one. So before we get into some more like specifics about this one, did you have, as you started the first book, did you have an arc for the whole series about what's going to happen with Beth and her stalker? And did you know kind of where you were going to drop those things within books, or are you just kind of doing it as you go along?
No, honestly, I'm not a very good plotter. I do much more, by the seat of my pants. But for her personal story arc, I did kind of have an idea. I did kind of have an idea of bringing her family mystery with her when she goes up to Alaska, and her stalker, and how, if they find him and how they find him and the ties maybe he had to her entire family. That actually kind of has been in my head. I've stuck with it pretty well, but we'll see how it goes after, this next one. Yeah.
And one of the things I like that you do really well too is that you give, like, especially in this one, we start to see some of what those family connections are, and you give kind of, I felt like, just enough answers to kind of keep you intrigued in the story, but not enough to like really satisfy you. So where's the balance there?
I appreciate that. That's what I try. I'm searching for a balance. A lot of people don't like the cliffhangers. Some people enjoy the cliffhangers. So I'm trying to find that middle ground of, ooh, let's keep the interest going, but let's not keep everything to myself. Give pieces a little bit at a time.
Allie Carter, who does young adult books, talks about the difference between there being cliffhangers and game changers, where like the cliffhanger is, I have no idea what's happened at the end of this book, as opposed to a cliffhanger where you're like, okay, there was this resolution, and then maybe like the phone rings and you don't know what's happened there. So like this mystery has been resolved, but then like whatever is going to happen next, you have no idea what's going to happen.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. That's fabulous. Yeah, that's great.
So also speaking of Allie Carter, she recently did a Netflix movie, A Castle for Christmas, and the plot of it is, she wrote it. So the plot is, this writer is having a hard time writing a book. So she's written a book. Everybody's hated it. So to deal with the backlash, she like goes to this castle in Scotland where her family is potentially from. But because she's a writer, one of the things I asked her was, everybody has this sort of Hollywood version of what a writer is. So as she's trying to write a character in a movie that's a writer, how did she balance like what people think writing is with what writing actually is? And she said that, the day-to-day life of a writer isn't very cinematic, which is why you end up getting things like writer's block plots and, people angrily crumpling up paper and the ball of paper on the floor. So because Beth is a writer, how do you do that? How do you tackle what people would potentially want to see on the page as a character for her being a writer versus maybe the writing life might not be something so entertaining that it would end up that much in the book?
Right, right. Oh, well, I leave out the parts about her banging her head on her desk, which maybe I've done a couple times. I leave out the exasperating moments where, one more word typing. Okay, you do your you have a word count every day and you're at 995 words and you have to do 1,000. So the next five are, I will write the rest tomorrow. That sort of thing. So I try to leave some of that out. There is a there are the amazing gleeful days where the fingers just fly and the words just come easily. So I think I give Beth more of those than probably it is realistic. I don't know, but I think that being a writer for me is such a dream come true, obviously, as it is for most people. But what the big motivating factor can be sometimes is, bottom line, there's a deadline. And you've got to get the words out. So if they get stuck, you just keep going, and then all of a sudden, it's amazing. Trust the process; it comes together.
So as you mentioned in this one, we finally get to see Beth's mom, Mill, in action. She's shown up in Benedict, and you get to see her kind of wreak havoc wherever she goes. And she's such a great character because you just see her kind of bulldozing her way in, and her motivations to her make a lot of sense, but for everybody else, there are all of these complications. So she's this character that you're like, you don't think that you should necessarily like her, but you also can't help but like her because she's also so magnetic. Can you talk a little bit about writing her?
Oh, she was such a blast to write. I loved it. She's my lovable narcissist that she's obsessive, compulsive. She's completely all about herself, but at the same time, there's a part of her that knows she shouldn't be completely all about herself, and she lets that guide her ways a little bit more than even she would like. But she is she is about vengeance. She is about revenge. She is about taking care of her people. But bottom line, when it comes down to it, she is a narcissist. And so she uses that narcissistic manipulation and that obsessive compulsive behavior to get what she wants, how she thinks it should be. And so far, we'll see how it goes. But so far, it's been kind of working out for her.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's also interesting about the series, because it's set in Alaska and it's in the wilderness, is the police chief is able to kind of bend rules here and there. And early in the book, there's a character who, since there's not really like a jail in town, ends up kind of getting locked in the halfway house overnight, or for a while, because there's just nowhere else to put her. So when you're writing something like that, that's not necessarily, because it's not technically police procedural, because that wouldn't necessarily be police procedure. How do you figure that out? Do you talk to somebody who's up there and say, like, what would you do in this situation? Or is it something that you're just sort of making up as you're writing it?
I kind of made it up. When there is no place to put somebody, you just kind of have to work with it. And I had the weather. I got to work with the weather, and the weather could shut things down. I could use all of those tools to make it hopefully at least a little bit realistic. But what I did do, as far as research goes, I have called a few halfway houses, and I have asked a few questions regarding, first of all, what do they call the people who stay there? They don't call them parolees as much as they call them clients, which very much surprised me. As far as the halfway houses go, there would really be no situation other than a situation like what I created, where they would keep a prisoner there overnight, locked in a room. That would be a little rough. But in Benedict, when you can't get out, you kind of have no choice. So that was nice. Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of gives it that kind of frontier justice Wild West vibe to it, because they're like, look, this is just what we have to do.
I like that. I like that vibe.
So as you mentioned, weather can create a problem for people getting in and out of town. So since Benedict itself is so remote, it's got to be tough to be able to, I would imagine, introduce new characters, which you have to have for a mystery series, because if you only have the small town with so many people, you kind of run out of suspects quickly. So can you talk about some of those challenges of writing such a remote location where there's maybe one way in or out, and those could be potentially out of commission for a couple of weeks?
Right. And that's a big reason why I brought in the census man. In this one, I thought, okay, there's a very valid another person who could come into the mix and who could, either mix things up one way or another. So there are also a lot of people hiding. They're not hiding, but they're out in the wilderness and they have not emerged yet, for as far as Beth knows. So there's more people for her to get to know. The other part of Benedict is it's outside Glacier Bay National Park. So tourists can come into play a little bit more. So hopefully using all of those, I can continue to bring more people in it as it goes along. And of course, who knows who else will show up, who Beth might have known down in Missouri. Yeah.
Yeah, and it works so well because as you set it up, it's this town that people sort of come to disappear. They're hiding things, so it would make sense that oh, there might be somebody living out in this corner of the woods that like nobody talks to or nobody knows. So it makes sense that like you might bump into somebody that you haven't heard about just yet.
Right. It's a small community, 500 or so people, but she still hasn't met even 100 yet. So hopefully there's still more to find. Yeah.
So we talked about series arc. We talked about location. We talked about writers. So let's talk about titles real quick. So for this one, you've had, usually with a cozy mystery series, you have titles that are going to have some kind of pun in them, usually related to the character's job. So far for you, you've had 2-word titles in all of these.
Right.
Did you come up with these titles yourself, or did they get workshopped?
Well, the first one, honestly, I can't even remember what Thin Ice was supposed to be, but we had to come up with another title. The editor didn't like it or something. So I actually asked my plot group buddies, Jen McKinley and Kate Carlisle. I said, I need help with a title. And Kate actually came up with that particular title, Thin Ice. So that worked really well. Then when Cold Wind was turned in, I called it A Cold Wind, not even thinking about the 2-word title yet. And they changed that to the 2-word title. And so with this third book, we're like, oh, I get it. I see the pattern. so maybe we can come up with a 2-word on this one. And because the darkness does play such a role in this particular time frame of the story, Dark Night came into play, even though dark, K-N-I-G-H-T, has a totally different meaning. But but yeah, so that one. And then the fourth one that again comes out next year has been decided upon as Winter's End. So I think the 2-word title is going to continue. Yeah.
Nice. And then let's talk about covers a little bit, because the cover for this one's so different than the first two as well. Like the first one was kind of blue and you had the little, you could see the kind of the town in the distance. The second one, Cold Wind, you kind of had that blue green. And then like this one, it's just so stark white with just that bloody boot print. Can you talk a little bit about the cover choosing process?
Well, it shocked me. When I first saw it, I gasped, really, because I was expecting something a little more along the lines of the first two. Something, with the darkness or with the town, the sense that it had already been created. But once I looked at it, I was like, oh, this really does look good. This will stand out. And it does look good. It doesn't stand out on a computer screen as much, but it does stand out on a bookshelf. So that's good news. But it did shock me. And the words, the font, the artist actually created that just for this particular series. So I know, isn't that cool? I think that's so cool. It's such an honor. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. So I love that the artist made that font for the series.
Awesome. So I've got a question from the crowd. Where has been your favorite place to travel and research for a book?
I would have to say both Edinburgh and Gustavus. When we went to Gustavus, we also did Juneau, and Juneau was shocking. I was taken by the beauty. I don't know why, because all of Alaska is beautiful, but it was beautiful. But it was also, there was such a sense that it was a haunted city. I don't know if you've ever been to Juneau, but we were riddled by strange coincidences, like running into the same people at different spots. It was bizarre and strange. And we went to this old mine and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are ghosts there. And that was just a blast to feel Juneau, to be in Juneau, to enjoy that. But it's hard to deny that Edinburgh wasn't just a fabulous place to visit. It's just incredible. Scotland is an incredible place. So I've been lucky to be able to write books in the two places that I have enjoyed the most. Yeah.
So speaking of Scotland, can you tell everybody a little bit about Delaney and the Scottish Bookshop series?
Sure, you bet. You bet. Delaney worked in Wichita, Kansas, and was laid off from a museum job. And she answered an internet ad to work in a bookshop across the sea at desk where kings and queens might have worked. And so she somehow got the job with the bookshop owner. The bookshop is the Cracked Spine. Edwin McAllister is the owner of the bookshop, and he hired her to come across the sea and to be their archivist. And there she has started and changed her life entirely, and she solves murders all the time.
And so the newest one of those in that series is The Burning Pages, which is going to be out in April. And
Right.
this year's book, Deadly Editions, is going to be out in paperback in February for anybody wondering about that. One of the things I love about that series is as Delaney's wandering around, she can hear all of the books kind of whispering to her. So where did the idea for that come from?
Well, that was just something that kind of came about organically when I was writing the first book. I'm always surprised at the little hints of paranormal. I never sit down to really write paranormal. Like, for instance, with my cooking school series, there was no sense. When we first talked about it or wrote it, there was no paranormal, and I was writing it. As I was writing it, the ghost kind of appeared. And fortunately, my editor liked it. And so we kind of rolled with it and stayed with it. But I knew I couldn't do paranormal with the Cracked Spine, but I could do something a little odd. So it just kind of happened organically, and it just stuck. Yeah.
It's such a just fun, just little quirk. It's so fun.
The characters help her and guide her. And in fact, in The Burning Pages, the one that comes out next April, I believe her book, they call it her bookish voices. They actually kind of help her even more solving in that mystery. Yeah.
So how do you jump back and forth between the two series? Do you work completely on one, and then when it's done, you start on the next one, or are you working on them both at the same time?
Usually I am working a little bit on both at the same time. It's always good for, I think, taking a break from what I'm currently working on and putting my energy towards something else is a great way to kind of refill my creative well. It's at the point where you're doing copy edits or revisions or something like that, I feel like I have to give my full focus because I don't want to be distracted and miss something like call a character the name of someone from the other book or something like that. But for the most part, I am usually working on both.
So Susan wants to know, what three writers, past or present, would you like to meet?
Oh, I would love to meet Phyllis A. Whitney. I would absolutely love to have been able to meet Phyllis A. Whitney. My parents met her assistant in a restaurant in Ohio decades ago when I was a teenager going to B. Dalton booksellers to get all my Phyllis A. Whitney books. And I would have loved to have met Phyllis A. Whitney. So one I did meet, but I would like to have had the opportunity to meet again would be Sue Grafton. So unfortunately, rest in peace, Sue. She's no longer with us, but I was on the elevator with her at a Malice convention that I went to. It was just Sue and me, and that was it. And I went blank. I couldn't say a word. I was struck dumb and struck silent, and I always wanted another chance to be able to, talk to her and say how wonderful she is and was. And so, okay, so Phyllis, Sue, and were there three? Am I supposed to name three? Okay, let's think here. There are a lot, but I would probably go with, I would love to meet Stephen King. I'd love to sit across a table from Stephen King and have a dinner conversation. I think that would be fabulous. Yeah.
We last August, when Independent Bookstore Day got rescheduled to August of last year from April, we were able to do a virtual event with Stephen King in conversation with James Lee Burke. And it was just like, it was the coolest thing. He was so nice. We asked, usually for everyone watching, usually we log in with authors like 10 minutes early just to make sure the tech and everything was working. And we said, can you log in just a little bit earlier? Is it okay if like the whole staff logs in? Because we would all just like a chance to just like at the very least say hi. My coworker Sally is a huge Stephen King fan. He was so nice. He let us, chat with him for a few minutes before things got started, and it was just like that was just the coolest thing in the world.
Isn't that great? He comes off as being such a great guy, and it's always nice to hear he truly is. Yeah,
And so
yeah.
supportive of crime fiction and crime writers, and he's always talking about writers and crime fiction that he's read and loved lately. It's always so fun to see authors that we're friends with, like their reactions when they see that Stephen King tweet has come out.
Right. Well, in fact, I think I'm reading a book right now based upon something that he did tweet about. It's the 5 Decembers or something by who wrote that? James Kestrel, I think. Yeah, the 5 Decembers. I'm actually reading that right now, and I think that was based upon a Stephen King tweet. It's great. It's great.
So, as a writer, when you are picking up something to read for pleasure, are you able to turn off the writer part of your brain and just enjoy it? Or are you trying to figure out kind of like, hey, this is why this is working for me, this isn't why? Or so does it work for you, or are you able to just enjoy it?
Well, a little bit of both, actually. I once since I've started being a writer, I haven't read or watched a movie or watched TV or anything the way I did before that. But I wouldn't say that makes it unenjoyable. I still enjoy the story and everything like that. But I do love to try to figure out, why is this working so well? Why am I turning these pages nonstop? And of course, I love to do that. But I think it's a little bit of both. I think I enjoy the process enough that learning about it doesn't take away my enjoyment of just enjoying the story. Yeah.
One of the first virtual events we did was with James Rollins, and he talked about how when he decided he wanted to write thrillers, he literally got a copy of Jurassic Park and practically tore the book apart, reading and be like, okay, this is the point where you see the dinosaur for the first time. This is the beat where, and all of those thriller beats, and that's how he learned to pace his thrillers, by literally just taking apart a copy of a book and figuring out where all of that was.
Oh, and you can't beat Jurassic Park. I mean,
Yeah.
that was incredible. Funny side note, my son, who is 27, loved Jurassic Park. He read it when he was in 6th grade, and we read it kind of as a group. He loved it, and then he loved the movies and everything. And he just got married in October, and he chose the Jurassic Park theme song as the song for him to walk out to meet meet the officiant there on the deck. So it was funny. I looked at him, I said, "Is that Jurassic Park?" And he said, "That's Jurassic Park."
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
So what type of stuff do you pick up when you want to read for pleasure? Do you read within the genre or out of it, all of it?
I read a little bit in and out of. There are so many great cozy mysteries that I still enjoy reading, but I also love the thrillers. The thing that surprises me even more is my recent new adoration of science fiction. It probably started with The Martian a few years back, and that's a pretty high bar to start at. But I listened to The Martian on a road trip, and it was so compelling. And so therefore, the Expanse series, that's been so compelling. And I kind of skim over the science stuff, to be very honest with you. I don't have the brain for the science stuff, but I love the stories. And one of my favorite books this last year was Project Hail Mary. So I've loved science fiction. That's been a surprise. I love women's fiction. That's fun. And I love the big sweeping saga books that take somebody's entire life and start, tell us how they were as a child and then to the day they die. I love those books. I love hearing about a whole entire lifespan.
Nice. It's funny that you say that about sci-fi. I went through a reading rut fairly recently, and one of the things that pulled me out of it was romance.
Oh,
Specifically
yeah.
rom-coms, but just romance in general. And when I get to the part where it's like, oh, here come the sexy times, I just skim right past it and get back. Because so just like you do with the science, I'm like, oh, here comes the smutty stuff. I'm going to skip this.
Right. Yeah, doesn't do it for me. Just give me the people, give me the character.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I gotcha. Yeah.
That's so funny. I've just hit the point where I think I say this, knock on wood, I am slightly caught up with stuff to read for upcoming events and the cozy subscription box like that. So for the next, I don't know, week and a half, 2 weeks, I have just some time to just kind of read whatever I want, not necessarily. And it's still going to obviously still be upcoming stuff that I'm excited about that are mysteries, but I'm really excited for a little bit of a break to just kind of dig into, I'm reading a YA fantasy now, and I've got some romance queued up. So I'm excited to just kind of get to read a little bit differently than I usually do.
What YA fantasy are you reading, if you don't mind me asking?
It's called Fears Like a Firestorm. The
Okay.
author is Lana Popovich.
Okay.
She just wrote a rom-com with Berkeley called Payback's a Witch under the name Lana Harper,
Oh,
which I really, really liked a lot. And so these YA books, it's a 2-book series, and it's about these two twins who have this kind of magical power. They each have a different one, and they realize that all the women in their family have been cursed, and their mom goes missing, and they're trying to figure out what's happened to her.
oh, that sounds great.
So I've been like dying to get to the second one, and I finally just started it this morning. I'm going to drop a link to the first one in the comments for anybody who is curious, and I can email it to you too, Paige. And I've dropped comments for or links for Project Hail Mary and the 5 Decembers in the comments as well. So
well, terrific. And if you're looking, I've got to plug my buddy Jen McKinley's rom-coms. Paris is always a good idea, and wait for it if you're interested in rom-coms. So yeah.
Yep. I love Jen and Kate Carlisle too. That seems like such a fun writers group. So can you talk a little bit about like what you get from a writers group and what you guys do?
We do plotting, which, you know, I'm not much of a plotter, but I love our get-togethers. So we have a great time together, and we actually do work. I have to say we work. I would say we probably have more fun than we spend time working, but we actually do work, and it's a great chance to get together. Yes, when you're a writer, you do a lot of stuff alone. And if you're fortunate enough to have some writer friends, you can get together and kind of talk over the water cooler is how we say it. And talk about what our struggles are, what our challenges are, what our good things are. And when you have a supportive group like those two, it just makes for a fabulous time and a fabulous weekend. And we try to, before COVID, we tried to get together in places where we could go have fabulous food and desserts and all that kind of great stuff. So, I look forward to those days coming back again. And we've been able to do this on Zoom, and it's still great, but not as much fun as in person. Yeah.
And I imagine publishing is such a weird industry. I imagine it's got to be nice to be able to just like bounce ideas off of people, or just be like, can you believe this weird publishing thing that's happened that like nobody else would understand, but that other writers will?
Right, or exactly, or what certain authors are tweeting or something like that. It's very much fun. Yeah.
So to jump back to the Alaska series, so do you have an idea for how many books you want in the series? Do you have like a finite ending for it?
I don't have in my head a finite ending. There are going to be at least 5. So we've got the one next year, and then the publisher did buy a 5th one as well. So
Great.
there will be at least 5, and I don't feel like I see an ending yet. So I would like to go on as, a lot of that is, as writers, out of our hands. A lot of that is basically up to the publishers. Although there are writers who will say, okay, we're 40 books in, maybe we should stop, So it's a lot up to the publisher, but I don't see an end quite yet. So I don't really see an end for the Scottish Bookshop or the Alaska Wild yet, but hopefully it will go on for a long time. Yeah.
Great. And so for people that are out there watching, that means please keep buying these so that way we can get some more.
Yes.
And they both seem like they're such great worlds, especially like with the Scottish Bookshop, with the antiques and the cool things that Delaney comes across. It seems like there's always great potential for side adventures. And with these two, it would be fun, I think, to see, what would happen if Beth had to leave Alaska, or,
Right.
I feel like there's a lot of potential there to play in a world.
Right. So what if they do catch her kidnapper and he has to go to trial, or what if he does show up there? There are some great what ifs still. Yeah.
So we got another question from the crowd. So we've been talking about the thrillers that you've done, as well as cozies, but would you, or have you written any other genre?
I haven't written any other genre. I would, if I could. I'm not sure. When I first started writing back in 1997, when I decided I was going to take this writing thing seriously, and I was sure I'd be published by Y2K. and did not get published until 2010. Back in those days, the only writers group that was around my area, I lived up in Salt Lake City, Utah, was the Utah Romance Writers Group. And they were fabulous. They were welcoming and wonderful. And they did contests, and I worked on writing romance, but I hadn't read a lot of romance. And so I don't think it came as naturally to me, but it was a wonderful opportunity to, stretch my writing muscles and get some feedback and go from there. But then it was when I switched to mystery, the genre from which I've read thousands of books.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it was easier. It just came a little more naturally. So I think that as much as I love sci-fi now, I certainly haven't read thousands of sci-fi books yet. So I'm not sure that would come naturally to me. Even if I have stories in my head that I would love to write, I think that sticking with the genre or close enough to the genre that I'm most familiar with is the best idea.
And so when you started writing mysteries, what was it specifically that drew you to cozy mysteries?
Oh, that's I didn't even know cozies existed. I didn't know what a cozy was. So I wrote this mystery. It was a paranormal mystery. It was about witches, and that's how I ended up getting my agent. Thank you, knock on wood on that one too. But that's how I ended up getting my agent. But that particular book didn't sell. It didn't sell. So she's like, well, let's talk about other ideas. And she came up with the farmer's market idea, and that's where that went. But in the process, she said to me, you have a good voice for cozy. And so I wrote down on a piece of paper, COSY question mark or COZY question mark. And I said to her, because fake it till you make it, I'm like, oh, I love cozies. And I'm like, I don't even know what a cozy is. So we hung up from the call, and I ran to the local bookstore and said, can you help me understand what cozies are? Yeah. And so the books they took me to were the Cat Who books. And I'm like, oh, I've read those. I didn't know they were called cozies. Okay, I get it. So I didn't really even know what it was. It was just a mystery to me. Mysteries. Yeah.
I love that. Like Ellen Byron talks about that too, how she started writing and her agent was like, you're writing a cozy mystery. She was like, I don't know what that is. So I love when that happens.
Right. Yeah. To us, it's just mysteries. And to many readers, I think that the cozy genre is more recognizable now as something. But back then, I think we just all thought it was mysteries. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. As people who follow me online know, I've just been reading through all of the Leslie Meyer, Lucy Stone mysteries. They're so good, but it's so crazy to go back and read the earlier ones where like they're kind of cozy, but she breaks so many cozy rules. Like two animals die in the first book in the series, and in the second one there's like some child molestation that happens. You're like, oh my gosh, these like what? Like I don't even think that one's in print anymore. I tracked down an ebook version of it, but it's really interesting to see kind of some of those early things that like now we think of as cozies, where for a while it was just like they just happened to be kind of amateur sleuth lighter mysteries that were written by women that maybe at some point publishers didn't quite know what to do with them, so they eventually became cozies. It's really interesting to see some of those books that were coming out kind of in the early mid 90s and see kind of how they got put in that genre, whether they kind of quite belonged there or not.
Right. And how they still hold up. I mean, they're still readable and delightful, and the viewpoint is just fabulous. Yeah.
And it's so much fun to read, especially with like the Leslie Meyer ones, because like the series started like in the mid 90s. So like there weren't cell phones, there weren't computers. Like there's a whole book where her kids are explaining to her like what MySpace is, or like she realizes that like there's porn on the internet, and it's really funny to see her like evolve throughout the 90s and like learn what new technology and stuff was.
Right. I was just thinking the other day. So my son was born in 94. And so the 90s are actually kind of a blur for me. I was so busy. So I was looking, I'm like, were the 90s a thing? Yeah, the 90s were a thing. Yeah.
Which are weirdly coming back now with all of the 90s fashion and stuff. I'm like, we lived through this fairly recently. Why are we doing this again?
Right. Yeah. Just yesterday. Yeah.
So how long have you been able to be writer full time?
Well, I was fortunate that I got to do this my first book published in 2010. So at about 2013 or 2014, my husband also owned a restaurant at the time. So I was able to quit my advertising job and help him at the restaurant and write full time. And then I've been just writing full time for quite a while, for probably 6 or 7 years. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we have talked about what you've got coming up next, but can you remind everybody a little bit just about the next upcoming Scottish Bookshop mystery?
Sure, you bet. The Burning Pages publishes in April, and I like to always have a thread of something Scottish history through it. And along with the title, this is Robert Burns. It'll be there's a fire. There's also a lot of Robert Burns throughout the book, and we get to know her coworker Hamlet quite a bit better in this one.
Perfect. Awesome. And then one question I didn't ask that I always ask so since this is the third, Dark Knight is the third in the Alaska series, do you recommend people go back and start with the first one, or do you think that they can jump in with this one?
I think they can jump in. I think they can, although I'm not sure. I was thinking about that again this morning. Mill is such a character. The build up to getting to know Mill through the first 2 books. You might want to read the first 2, but you can read the third one as a standalone for sure. But you're not going to get the full Mill without the first 2. Right.
Yeah. So will we get to see her more in the next book?
I don't know.
Oh.
I can't tell you yet.
Right. All right. So I think that is going to about do it for us for this evening. But who might have joined us late, we have been chatting. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Hello. Okay, there you go. Okay.
There we go. We had a little bit of a blip there. Okay, perfect. So to recap for anybody who might have joined us late, we've been chatting with Paige Shelton, whose new book, Dark Knight, just came out today. As we mentioned, it is the third book in the Alaska Wild series. We have all 3 in store right now. I've dropped links to the store to the event page. If you want to order them, you can either do it online. Right now, we're still doing free media mail shipping on orders over $75. And you still have a couple more days before we start getting into holiday cutoff deadline. So if you need us to mail them to you, you can do it that way. You can come in and visit us or give us a call over the phone. If you missed any part of the chat, once we are done, you can go back on Facebook and YouTube and rewatch it. You can also check out the one that we did last year when Cold Wind came out. It's up there as well if you want to hear a little bit more about that one. As I mentioned when we got started, we've got a lot of great stuff coming up as well. So make sure you check out the store's website for more info about our upcoming virtual events. But I think that's going to do it for us for the evening, Paige. It was so great to get to chat with you again.
Oh, John, always great to see and chat with you. And thank you to you, everybody at the bookstore and all the readers. Thank you all very much.
Thanks so much. Have a good night.
Okay, thanks. See you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.